What if I told you that many servants did not live to old age precisely because of their night work? This invisible world behind the closed doors of luxurious mansions hid a terrible secret: the slow decline of thousands of people. We are used to seeing the Victorian era through the prism of balls, etiquette, and beautiful dresses, but the foundation of this glamour was mixed with round-the-clock, exhausting labor. Behind the immaculate cleanliness and hot breakfasts were those whose working day never ended and whose sleep was considered an unaffordable luxury. The shadows gliding through the corridors by candlelight were not ghosts, but living people whose strength was drained by an endless cycle of duties. Their bodies were destroyed not by one specific disease, but by a monstrous combination of factors that were considered the absolute norm at the time. Chronic sleep deprivation, constant cold, and working at the limits of their physical capabilities turned young women and men into frail old people in a matter of years. Watch the video to the end to find out why night watch in a wealthy home was more dangerous than working in many factories, and how the architecture of mansions was specifically designed to steal health. Are you ready to learn the truth about how the walls of a house can kill? The very layout of a Victorian mansion was designed to make the lives of servants unbearable from a modern perspective. Bedrooms for lower-ranking staff were often located not in cozy rooms, but in damp, poorly ventilated basements or stuffy attics. These were spaces where sunlight hardly penetrated and where the air always remained heavy and musty. Architects of that era cared about the comfort of their masters, creating complex ventilation systems for ceremonial halls, but completely ignored the service quarters. In such stone bags, moisture accumulated over the years, soaking bedding, clothing, and the lungs of sleeping people. Constant exposure to dampness meant that the body could never fully recover and warm up, even during short hours of rest. The walls of the basement floors often bordered the ground without any waterproofing, turning the bedrooms into something like glaciers in winter. In summer, these rooms turned into ovens, as the small windows near the ceiling did not provide a normal supply of oxygen. Servants slept in stuffy air saturated with kitchen fumes, coal dust, and sewer odors. This created the perfect environment for chronic fatigue, where people woke up even more exhausted than when they went to bed.
Absolutely breathtaking, wasn't it?
The lack of normal personal space also played a fatal role in the process of psychological and physical exhaustion. Several people could sleep in one cramped room, which made it impossible to get the deep sleep necessary for the nervous system to recover. Any rustle, a neighbor's cough, or the creaking of a bed interrupted their fragile rest, preventing the body from entering the rapid eye movement (REM) phase of sleep. People lived for years in a state of permanent sleep deprivation, which catastrophically reduced their immunity and resistance to any external threats. They existed in survival mode, where each new day required the mobilization of the body's last reserves. In addition, the service staircases, which they had to run up and down hundreds of times a day and night, were narrow, steep, and often lacked railings. This not only increased the risk of injury, but also placed a tremendous strain on the joints and cardiovascular system. Their bodies were worn down by constant pressure changes and physical overload when lifting heavy loads to the upper floors. Their legs ached, their backs were stiff, and their hearts worked overtime trying to pump blood through veins clogged with fatigue. And all this happened in conditions where a person could not afford even a minute of real relaxation. It is noteworthy that this state of affairs was not considered cruel, but was perceived as the natural order of the world. The owners sincerely believed that the rough nature of the common people did not need the comforts that were necessary for the aristocracy. This social blindness allowed architects to save space at the expense of the health of those who served that space. The house became not a fortress, but a slow press, squeezing life out drop by drop. The worst thing was that the servants had no way of changing these conditions, as they were completely dependent on their employer. Complaining about the cold or damp could lead to immediate dismissal without references, which meant starvation on the streets. Therefore, they endured in silence, wrapping themselves in thin blankets and trying to warm themselves with their breath in the icy rooms. Their bodies adapted to the constant discomfort, shutting down pain and alarm signals until a critical moment arrived. As a result, by the age of 30, many servants suffered from rheumatism, chronic bronchitis, and other diseases typical of the elderly. Their joints were deformed by dampness and hard labor, and their skin took on an earthy hue from lack of sunlight and fresh air. This was the price they paid for a roof over their heads, a roof that was killing them. The invisible impact of architecture was as destructive as hard physical labor, but it was only noticed when it was too late. Interestingly, even in the wealthiest homes, where no expense was spared on decor, saving on heating the servants' quarters was a matter of principle. It was believed that the cold invigorated the servants and prevented them from being lazy, stimulating them to be active. This cynical logic justified the icy floors and frozen walls that sucked the life warmth out of sleeping people. Thus, night after night, the luxurious mansion took its toll on the health and lives of those who maintained its splendor. We are very interested in hearing your point of view. What do you think about this attitude towards people living under the same roof as the elite? Write about it in the comments.
And now it is gone.
I'm afraid the evidence points.
Guess how many hours a day a kitchen maid slept during the height of the London season? The concept of a working day for Victorian servants was very arbitrary, as their duties flowed smoothly from day to night. It was especially hard for those at the bottom of the hierarchy: dishwashers, junior footmen, and kitchen workers. Their morning began long before dawn, often at 5 or 4 o'clock in the morning, in order to have time to light the stoves and heat water for their masters. But their day did not end at sunset, as evening receptions and dinners were just beginning. When the hosts and their guests went to bed, a new stage of work began for the night shift, which was no less difficult and responsible. They had to clear the tables, wash mountains of porcelain and crystal, clean the silverware, and prepare everything for breakfast. This endless cycle of duties left a mere 5 or 6 hours for sleep, which was often broken up into short periods. Deprived of the opportunity to go through all the phases of sleep, the body began to malfunction, plunging the person into a state of chronic trance. Particularly exhausting was the duty of monitoring the fireplaces and stoves, which could not be allowed to go out for a single minute during the cold season. This meant that someone had to wake up regularly or not go to bed at all in order to stoke the coal and clean the grates. This work was often assigned to the youngest and most inexperienced, whose growing bodies were in particular need of rest. The night watch at the stove was a test of endurance, where the price of a mistake was freezing cold in the master's bedrooms in the morning. Chronic sleep deprivation led to loss of concentration, which was deadly dangerous when working with fire, boiling water, and sharp knives. Servants often suffered burns and cuts simply because their brains shut down for a second due to exhaustion. These injuries were rarely treated properly, often became inflamed, and developed into serious problems. But even with a bandaged arm or leg, they continued to work, because stopping meant losing their job. In addition, night work was carried out by the dim light of candles or gas lamps, which put enormous strain on the eyes. Eyesight rapidly deteriorated, and the constant tension of the facial muscles led to chronic headaches. People squinted, bent lower over their work, curving their spines, and by morning felt completely exhausted. Gas lighting also burned oxygen and emitted harmful impurities, poisoning the air in already stuffy rooms. In such conditions, the nervous system worked at its limit, causing constant irritability or, conversely, complete apathy. The servants moved like robots, performing memorized actions. But inside, they felt a growing emptiness and indifference to their own fate. They ceased to enjoy the taste of food or the joy of rare days off, turning into living functions. This state of deep psychological burnout was a direct consequence of the disruption of circadian rhythms. The human biological clock, tuned to the change of day and night, was brutally disrupted by the demands of service. The hormonal system responsible for cell regeneration and growth malfunctioned, accelerating the aging process. 20-year-old girls looked 40, Their skin lost its elasticity, and their hair became dull and fell out. This was a visible manifestation of the destruction that was taking place inside the body. Ignoring the need for sleep was considered a sign of diligence and dedication, encouraged by senior servants and masters. Those who collapsed from exhaustion but continued to work were held up as examples, creating a toxic culture of self-sacrifice. This culture left no room for self-care, making people ashamed of their natural need for rest. Sleep was perceived as a weakness that had to be overcome by willpower. As a result, night shifts became a silent killer, undermining health imperceptibly but inevitably. People literally burned out at work, giving their life energy to maintain the comfort of others. And no one questioned the price of a clean fireplace or polished shoes for morning tea. Have you ever wondered why servants in old novels are often described as pale and silent shadows? In the next chapter, you will learn a secret that will change your view of the cleanliness of old floors. Want to know a secret that will change your life and your perception of hygiene in the past? One of the most exhausting nighttime duties was polishing the floors and caring for the endless corridors of the mansion. This work required not only effort, but also unnatural body positions for many hours at a time. The maids crawled on their knees, rubbing wax and mastic into the wood, inhaling the acrid fumes of chemicals. The knees of these women turned into one big wound, covered with calluses and chronic inflammation of the joint capsules. There was even a special medical term for maid's knee, bursitis caused by constant pressure on the kneecap. This condition was accompanied by acute pain and swelling and often made it impossible to walk normally. But even with swollen knees, they had to continue their work, overcoming the pain every night. Floor polishes in the Victorian era were far from safe and often contained toxic substances: turpentine, lead, various solvents. Women breathed all of this in as they bent over the parquet flooring in poorly ventilated corridors. The toxic effects accumulated over the years, affecting the liver, kidneys, and nervous system. Dizziness and nausea were constant companions during night cleaning, but were attributed to normal fatigue. In addition, the process of scrubbing itself required considerable physical strength and monotonous, repetitive movements. This led to overexertion of the back and shoulder muscles, causing chronic pain and curvature of the spine. Young girls quickly lost their posture, their figures deformed under the weight of backbreaking labor. Their hands became rough and their fingers lost sensitivity from constant contact with stiff brushes and rags. Working on their knees in the silence of the night, when the whole house was asleep, also exerted powerful psychological pressure. The maid felt small and insignificant against the backdrop of the huge empty spaces she had to bring to perfection. This feeling of loneliness and hopelessness exacerbated the physical suffering, turning every night into torture. The dust they swept and cleaned out of the cracks was not harmless either. It contained particles of coal soot, fabric fibers, and dried particles of street dirt. Inhaling this mixture provoked the development of lung diseases, ranging from chronic coughs to more serious pathologies. Dust lungs were an occupational hazard not only for miners, but also for those who fought too hard for cleanliness. Heavy cast iron floor polishers were often used to make floors shine, and they had to be pushed back and forth for hours. This workload was comparable to working out at the gym, but without the opportunity for rest and proper nutrition. The heart worked in cardio training mode for several hours every night, depleting the heart muscle's resources. Early heart attacks were not uncommon among those who dedicated their lives to shiny parquet floors. Old wooden floors from which splinters or nails could protrude posed a particular danger. In the dim light, it was easy to miss them, which led to deep splinters and infected wounds. In the absence of antiseptics, any such injury could be fatal, leading to blood poisoning. This invisible work was the foundation of the splendor of the house, but its performers paid for it with their health and beauty. The perfectly polished floor, reflecting the morning sun, hid pain, tears, and destroyed joints behind its shine. We admire the interiors of that era, forgetting that every square meter was polished at the cost of someone's life. If you agree that such labor deserves to be remembered and respected, please like this video. Are you ready for the shocking truth about a sound that could drive you mad? The bell system for summoning servants was the nervous system of the Victorian home, and it never slept.
Very good, thank you. You are dismissed.
Rows of numbered bells hung in the servants' quarters, each corresponding to a specific room in the master's house. This sound could ring at any moment, day or night, and ignoring it was strictly forbidden. The constant anticipation of the bell created a state of continuous psychological tension, now known as hypervigilance. A servant could never completely relax, even in their own bed, as their brain continued to listen for silence. This anticipation was worse than the work itself, as it deprived a person of their right to personal time and space. The nervous system was in a constant state of alert, which led to rapid depletion of mental resources. Night calls were especially painful, as they required an instant transition from sleep to full activity. The owner might want a glass of water, to adjust their pillow, or simply to close the window. For this momentary whim, the servant had to get dressed, tidy themselves up, and climb several flights of stairs. Interrupted sleep often did not return, leaving the person exhausted until morning. The sound of the bell caused a conditioned reflex in many people, similar to a panic attack. The heart began to beat wildly, hands trembled, and breathing stopped before the person even understood where the ringing was coming from. This chronic stress led to the development of neuroses, tics, and stuttering. People literally shuddered at any sharp sound, even when they were away from home. The system was designed so that the servant had no right to speak or refuse, citing fatigue. He was a living extension of the house mechanism, a function that was activated at the push of a button. This complete depersonalization and deprivation of will broke character, turning people into obedient performers. Often the calls were the whims of bored masters who did not realize or did not want to realize that there was a living person on the other end of the line. Running up and down the stairs at the first request was as physically exhausting as hard work. Their legs felt like lead, but they could not stop. Footmen and maids who stood in the corridors waiting for orders suffered particularly. Hours of standing motionless or sitting on a hard chair in the dim light were torture, boring, and stressful. It was impossible to read, doze off, or go about one's business. One could only wait. This dependence on someone else's will and schedule destroyed the personality, depriving a person of the ability to plan their life. A servant did not belong to themselves for a single minute. Their time was completely owned by their employer. It was a form of slavery disguised as hired labor, where the chains were made of the sounds of brass bells. The psychological pressure was compounded by the fear of punishment for delay or slowness. Every second of delay could cost them their job, so servants rushed headlong to the call. This fear was the whip that drove tired people forward, preventing them from falling. Life on call turned existence into a series of interrupted moments where nothing was whole or complete. This fragmented time killed the sense of reality, leaving only an endless ding. How many steps do you think a servant had to take each day to answer these endless calls? In the next chapter, you will learn why even food did not give them strength.
Recent fluctuations make me hesitant to proceed.
Paradoxically, the people who prepared lavish feasts and served exquisite dishes often suffered from chronic malnutrition themselves. The servants' diet in Victorian homes was meager, monotonous, and often insufficient to replenish their enormous energy expenditure. While roast pheasant, elaborate sauces, and fresh fruit were served at the master's table, the servants' diet consisted of bread, tea, porridge, and meat scraps. There was a strict hierarchy even in the distribution of leftovers from the master's table. The best pieces went to the butler and housekeeper, and the lower staff got what was left after them. Often these were literally leftovers, cold, stale, and devoid of any nutritional value. Dishwashers and kitchen maids had to be content with bread crusts dipped in meat sauce. The lack of protein and vitamins in their diet led to anemia, weakness, and a weakened immune system. Young bodies did not receive the building blocks they needed to repair muscles and bones after hard work. Girls often fainted from hunger right at their workplace, which was attributed to female weakness rather than exhaustion. Meal times were also strictly regulated and often shortened to accommodate work duties. People ate on the go, in a hurry without chewing their food properly, which led to chronic gastritis and stomach ulcers. The digestive system suffered no less than the musculoskeletal system. Tea was the main stimulant that kept the servants' energy going. Strong, often overbrewed with lots of sugar, it gave a short burst of energy, followed by an even deeper slump. It was a kind of drug addiction that allowed them to deceive their hungry bodies. Meat dishes did not appear on the servants' table every day, and their quality left much to be desired. Often the cheapest cuts were purchased, consisting of fat and tendons, which required long cooking times. But the servants had practically no time to cook for themselves. In large houses, there was a practice of beer money, or giving weak beer as part of the ration. This added calories but did not solve the problem of nutrient deficiency. Alcohol dulled the feeling of hunger and fatigue, but in the long run only exacerbated health problems. The lack of fresh vegetables and fruits led to scurvy and dental problems, which were the scourge of the poor at that time. Rotten teeth became a source of constant infection in the body, poisoning it from within. The pain of bad teeth was a familiar backdrop to life that was no longer noticed.
Finally, the room was looking dreadfully spotless.
The very atmosphere of eating in a stuffy, dimly lit room for servants was not conducive to normal digestion. It was more like refueling than relaxation and enjoyment. Food was a functional necessity, devoid of taste and joy. This created a vicious circle. Hard work required a lot of energy that the meager food could not provide, forcing the body to eat itself. People lost weight, dried up, lost muscle mass, turning into living skeletons covered in uniforms. What if I told you that temperature changes killed more reliably than any poison? One of the most serious threats to the health of night servants was constant and sudden temperature changes. Working in the kitchen or laundry room, where stoves were constantly burning and water was boiling, servants were exposed to tropical heat and humidity. Their clothes were soaked with sweat, their pores opened, and their bodies overheated. But as soon as they stepped into the hallway, went down to the cellar for groceries, or climbed up to the unheated attic, they were hit by the freezing cold. This thermal shock was a tremendous stress on their blood vessels and immune system. Their heated bodies cooled down instantly, and their sweat-soaked clothes became like ice packs. Drafts were a constant feature of large houses with their endless corridors and doors. Night servants, running errands, were constantly exposed to drafts that penetrated to the bone. This led to endless colds, which turned into chronic pneumonia and pleurisy. Washing the porch or windows during the cold season was especially dangerous. Hands immersed in ice water cracked and bled, and finger joints became inflamed. But the work had to be done, regardless of the weather and temperature outside. The dampness of the basements, where work areas were often located, was an ideal environment for tuberculosis bacteria. Consumption mowed down the ranks of servants at an alarming rate, and dampness and cold were its main allies. Coughing was a familiar sound in the servants' quarters. The lack of warm clothing for working inside the house exacerbated the situation. Uniforms were often made of thin fabric designed for appearance rather than warmth. Woolen sweaters and shawls were not always allowed to be worn in the presence of the owners, so the servants froze while observing etiquette. The night chill crept under the blankets and during short naps. Unheated bedrooms made it impossible to warm up and dry the bedding. People lay down in damp sheets, shivering with cold, and got up in the same condition. In winter, the situation became catastrophic. Icy patterns on the interior walls of the servants' rooms were a common sight. The water in the wash jugs froze by morning, and washing became torture with ice chips. The body expended enormous resources just to maintain body temperature, taking them away from other vital processes. This constant hypothermia was no less debilitating than hunger or lack of sleep. Warmth was a privilege of the rich, and cold was the lot of those who served them. Only the strongest survived, but even they paid for it with their health in adulthood. Rheumatism, lung disease, and kidney problems were a direct result of this temperature torture. Could you withstand such temperature extremes every day? In the next chapter, you will learn about the hottest and most dangerous job in the house. Laundry in the Victorian era was not just a household chore, but a heavy industrial process that often fell on the shoulders of night servants. In large houses, the laundry never stopped, and laundries worked around the clock to provide the owners with fresh linen. It was a realm of steam, boiling water, and caustic chemicals, where women labored in conditions reminiscent of hellish cauldrons. Huge vats of boiling water had to be filled by hand, carrying hundreds of buckets. This was an unbearable strain on the back and arms, leading to hernias and prolapse of internal organs in women. The humid hot air was so thick that it was difficult to breathe and caused dizziness and fainting. The use of strong alkalis, chlorine, and other bleaching agents corroded the skin of their hands down to the flesh. Women laundresses suffered from chemical burns, eczema, and non-healing ulcers. There were no rubber gloves at that time, and their hands were constantly immersed in an aggressive environment. Heavy wet laundry, sheets, tablecloths, curtains, had to be wrung out by hand or with primitive rollers. This required enormous physical effort, which strained muscles and joints. Each sheet weighed kilograms when wet, and tons of fabric passed through the laundress's hands during a shift. Ironing was a separate challenge. Heavy cast iron irons were heated on stoves, and they had to be used quickly and accurately. The heat from the irons and stoves added to the already sweltering room temperature. Burns from irons were common, but no one paid any attention to them. Constant exposure to a humid environment led to fungal diseases and respiratory problems. Mold spores, which multiplied in the damp corners of the laundry room, settled in the lungs, causing asthma and allergies. The women literally suffocated from their own work. Night shifts in the laundry room were especially difficult due to the lack of natural light and general fatigue. In the dim light and steam, it was easy to get scalded or injured by the machinery. But the work did not stop, because by morning, everything had to be snow white and ironed. The social status of laundresses was one of the lowest, even among servants. Their work was considered rough and dirty, and they were often isolated from the rest of the staff. This added moral humiliation to physical suffering. This clean work was one of the dirtiest in terms of its impact on health. The snow-white cuffs and collars of gentlemen were paid for with the health of women whose hands were red and swollen from alkali and boiling water. The laundry was a machine that ground down human resources, turning young, healthy women into invalids. This was the price of the cult of perfect cleanliness in Victorian society. The physical strain on night servants was never limited to mundane cleaning and laundry. One of the most exhausting and difficult duties was the daily transport of coal and water throughout the floors of a huge house. We are talking about an era when central heating and running water were a rare luxury or non-existent. Every drop of hot water for the bath and every black coal in the fireplace was delivered there by hand. It was endless logistics that required the endurance of a pack animal. Heavy metal buckets filled to the brim with coal weighed a lot. They had to be carried up narrow and steep service stairs to the third and sometimes fourth floors. Hundreds of steps up and down with a load in their hands became a daily marathon. This distance had to be covered by fragile girls and teenagers whose bodies were not yet fully developed. The muscles of their legs and backs worked to the limit, literally to the point of exhaustion. The spines of the young maids were bent under the constant and uneven weight, but water was an even heavier and more dangerous load than fuel. Copper jugs with boiling water for the master's morning toilet had to be carried to all the bedrooms strictly before they woke up. One bath required many such trips, as the water cooled quickly. It had to be carried carefully so as not to spill boiling water on expensive carpets or on oneself. This process had a reverse, even more unpleasant side. The cooled and dirty soapy water then had to be collected in buckets and carried back downstairs to the drain. This endless cycle of water in the mansion was the basis of all hygiene in the house, but it placed an unbearable burden on the shoulders of the lowest category of servants. They were a living water supply system that had no right to break down. Carrying massive oak furniture, rolled-up carpets, and heavy travel trunks was also part of the staff's direct responsibilities. There was especially a lot of such work during general cleaning, preparation for lavish receptions, or when the family moved to their country residence. At that time, there were practically no freight elevators or convenient carts in houses. Everything was done exclusively by hand, using brute physical strength. The risk of serious injury, permanently straining one's back, or dropping a heavy load on one's foot was a constant companion of their labor. This work required not only enormous strength, but also cat-like agility. All handling of heavy loads had to be done absolutely silently and unnoticed by the masters. A puffing, red-faced, and sweaty servant carrying coal was not supposed to be seen by the owners. There was an unspoken rule that made their situation even more difficult. They had to remain invisible, their hard work always remaining deeply hidden behind the scenes of a beautiful life. Constantly carrying excessive weights had a devastating effect on women's health. This often led to serious, irreversible problems with the reproductive system. Many young maids eventually lost the physical ability to carry and give birth to a healthy child. They suffered from chronic, exhausting pain in their lower abdomen, which they had to endure in silence. This was yet another terrible sacrifice made on the altar of impeccable service to strangers. Women gave up their future for the comfort of their employers. The lack of knowledge about ergonomics and proper lifting techniques led to early and complete wear and tear of the intervertebral discs. Osteochondrosis and hernias were common by the age of 30. A noticeable hump or severe stoop was a professional deformity of many servants. Their bodies literally bent to the ground under the invisible weight of years lived and tons carried. The situation was exacerbated by clothing and footwear that were completely unsuitable for such loads. Servants wore cheap shoes with thin soles that did not cushion the impact of walking. The stone floors of service rooms and staircases slowly destroyed the joints of their feet and knees. Each step caused a dull pain, which over time became constant and familiar. By old age, many of them could hardly move without a cane. All this titanic physical labor was completely invisible to the owners of the house. The lords and ladies saw only the end result in the form of a hot bath and a cheerfully blazing fireplace. They never thought about how many man-hours and kilojoules of living energy this familiar comfort cost. The load was heavy, but complaining about it was strictly forbidden under threat of dismissal. So step by step, bucket by bucket, the servants spent their life forces. They provided the basic necessities of life for huge and voracious mansions. Their bodies were the living, unfailing engine of the household, fueled by their own health. The life of night servants was not only a difficult physical ordeal, but also a profound and exhausting social isolation. Working when the rest of the world was asleep and trying to sleep when life was bustling around them, they completely fell out of the normal human rhythm. They existed as if in a parallel universe, invisible to ordinary people. They had virtually no real opportunity to communicate fully with their families or old friends who had remained in the village. Finding a life partner in such conditions became an almost impossible task. The grueling work schedule left no time for a personal life. The rare days off, which were granted once a month at best, were often spent simply catching up on sleep. The body needed to recover, and there was no energy left for entertainment. Going to church for Sunday service, taking a walk in the park, or visiting friends was an unaffordable luxury. Most servants were deprived of these simple joys, which were available to any factory worker. The prohibition of any romantic relationships within the house was a strict rule in many wealthy mansions. The owners were terrified of scandals and unwanted pregnancies among the staff. Therefore, no suitors, then called followers, were allowed on the premises. This was a standard and mandatory requirement when hiring. Violation of this rule was followed by immediate retribution. A maid caught in a secret romance, or even just flirting, risked being fired on the spot. She would be dismissed without a letter of recommendation, which effectively put an end to her entire future career. No one wanted to hire a girl with a tarnished reputation. The fear of losing their jobs forced young people to suppress their natural feelings. This forced chastity and endless loneliness crippled the psyche of young, healthy people. The basic human need for love, warmth, and physical contact remained unsatisfied for many years. People gradually became hard-hearted, withdrawn, and unsociable. Sometimes they transferred their unspent affection to the children of their employers, whom they nursed. Or the object of their love became pets, which were the only creatures that gave them affection. The absence of a family of their own meant a complete lack of support in their old age. Servants who gave all their best years in health to someone else's home ended up being completely unwanted. They did not have time to build their own family nest because they were always busy. They had no children who could take care of them when their strength ran out. This was a generation doomed to a lonely decline. Communication between the servants themselves was also often far from ideal friendly interaction. It was severely limited by internal hierarchy and rampant snitching. Fierce competition for the best positions and the favor of the masters created an atmosphere of deep mistrust. Intrigue was rife at every turn, from the kitchen to the attic. Sincere friendship was a rarity in this human terrarium, where everyone survived as best they could. The feeling of complete isolation from the outside world was exacerbated by the fact that the servants lived in a veritable information vacuum. Fresh newspapers reached them with a long delay, often in the form of scraps. News about what was happening in the country was gleaned from overheard conversations of the masters at dinner. They lived in a small, closed world, the boundaries of which were defined by the stone walls of the mansion. The world outside the window was changing, but their lives stood still. The constant pressure of being around people without the right to be themselves also exerted enormous psychological pressure. They had to wear a perpetual mask of obedience and helpfulness, which over time literally grew into their faces. This role erased their individuality, turning a living person into a faceless shadow. The servant forgot who he really was, becoming merely a function or a position. His personality dissolved into the duties of a valet or maid. This social orphanhood was a high price to pay for illusory stability and a guaranteed piece of bread. People voluntarily sacrificed their personal happiness for the opportunity to serve in a wealthy household. They hoped that their devotion would one day be appreciated. But more often than not, at the end of the road, only bitter disappointment and a lonely old age in a government-run almshouse awaited them. Isolation was the invisible cage that held them tighter than any iron locks. They were voluntary prisoners of their work, deprived of the right to a simple human life. They were robbed of the joy of spontaneity and the warmth of family affection.
Come closer.
The end of a career for most exhausted and sick servants was predictable and incredibly cruel. Human resources were used to exhaustion, and no one felt pity for the worn-out material. As soon as the body could no longer cope with the excessive workload, a person's fate was sealed. As soon as the first signs of serious illness or decrepit old age appeared, the employee was immediately dismissed. In the harsh world of Victorian employment, there were no social guarantees. The concepts of sick leave, pensions, or disability insurance were something out of the realm of fantasy. The phrase "dismissed due to illness" sounded like a final and irrevocable sentence. Employers were disgusted by infirmity and did not want to keep a coughing maid in their house. A lame footman spoiled the appearance of the living room and annoyed guests. A sick servant instantly became a burden. an extra mouth to feed, and a potential source of dangerous infection. Sentimentality was completely out of place when it came to the efficiency of running a household. A dismissed servant found himself literally on the street with no means of subsistence and no roof over his head. It was practically impossible to save any money from a meager salary. This was especially difficult for those who regularly sent money to poor relatives in the village. People instantly fell from the heights of their position to the very bottom of the social ladder. Terrible workhouses were the only alternative to starvation in the gutter, but the conditions there were little better than those in penal colonies or prisons. People were separated from their loved ones, dressed in humiliating robes, and forced to perform meaningless work for food. For a person accustomed to the relative cleanliness and abundance of a gentleman's house, it was a living nightmare. Being sent to a workhouse was considered a terrible humiliation and the effective end of a normal life. The lack of good references due to illness closed the doors to other decent homes. A work record book with a bad entry or a gap in employment became a death sentence. No one wanted to hire defective material that could fall ill again. The reputation of a healthy and hardy worker was the only capital, and its loss was fatal. The cycle of poverty closed, leaving the unfortunate with no way out. Many former servants, especially young women, were forced to resort to extreme measures. They had to engage in prostitution or humiliating begging just to survive and buy food. Those who had polished the family silver in the Duke's mansion yesterday could die in a dirty ditch today. The contrast between their past and present lives was simply monstrous. Yesterday's working-class elite became the dregs of society. The early mortality rate among former servants who found themselves on the streets was alarmingly high. Their bodies, exhausted by years of labor, could not fight off infections and the cold of the streets. Tuberculosis and pneumonia decimated their ranks at a terrifying rate. They faded away in a matter of months, adding to the sad statistics of the nameless victims of the big city. Their bodies often ended up in mass graves for the poor. This system was a ruthless conveyor belt for processing people. It used human resources until they were completely worn out, physically and morally, and then discarded them into the dustbin of history. No one received any gratitude for years of loyal and impeccable service. The owners bore no responsibility for the health lost in damp basements. The relationship was based solely on cold calculation and complete indifference to human fate. The fate of night servants is a grim reminder of how little human life was worth in that era. We are accustomed to romanticizing the Victorian era, looking at beautiful dresses and balls. But the external glamour of the Golden Age was paid for in full by the broken lives of thousands of ordinary people. These were the ones whom high society did not notice. History has preserved for us the names of great lords, politicians, and noble ladies. But it has mercilessly erased the names of those who washed their laundry and stoked their marble fireplaces for decades. Their graves have long been overgrown with grass, and no one will bring flowers there anymore. But the truth about their hard lives and unnoticed deaths must be told. We have seen the other side of the beautiful picture of the Victorian era. Behind every starched collar and shining candelabra lies a story of pain, fatigue, and hopelessness. The system of night work for servants was a well-oiled mechanism of exploitation that ground down the lives of thousands of people, considering it the norm. The architecture, schedule, food, and attitude were all designed to squeeze the maximum benefit out of them at minimum cost. These people were not just workers. They were expendable materials for progress and comfort. Their chronic fatigue and illnesses were not accidental, but a natural consequence of the lifestyle imposed on them. Today, when we watch magnificent historical films, we rarely think about the price paid for this setting. But it is necessary to know this truth in order to understand the path that society has taken in the struggle for human rights and the dignity of labor. What struck you most about the living conditions of night servants? Was it the system of bells that deprived them of rest, or the cruelty of architectural solutions? Write your opinion in the comments. It is very important for us to know. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new dives into the dark secrets of history.